Welcome to the world of tomorrow. You are about to take a journey out of this world into the world of the future.
The atomic age was born.
The world of tomorrow became the world of today, bringing together all people in a new era of understanding.
Good sense requires that all of us prepare for any eventuality.
Imagine, if you can, an electronic brain operating at millions of a second speed.
Electrical pulses transmitted with the speed of light.
Limitless power at man's command. On man's wisdom, on his firmness in the use of that power, depends now the future of his children and his children's children. But wisdom demands, too, that we take time to understand this force.
Combat Information Center is alert. Its radars probing the darkness, ready to give early warning of any unseen enemy.
But have no fear, we are monitoring the situation.
Well, Steve, back. We're back again, finally, monitoring the situation. Look,
Back streets back. All right.
I'm going to stop.
Not exactly. Okay.
I'm going to stop you right there, okay?
We're having some silly time here at the beginning of the podcast.
Some silly times, but
So
I
we
want
are
to jump right
monitoring
into
the
it.
situations?
No, we are not monitoring in vaguely fey German, okay? I want to dive into, look, you put out a great piece just the other day. I don't want to date the podcast too much, but in it, you talked about a kind of an overwhelming sense of, something on the horizon, like I know the kids like to talk about vibes and all of that. And I feel like the word vibe shift has been overplayed, especially in the aftermath of the election and all of that. But I wanted to talk about it in a real way because one of the things that you and I, what are really the basis for the friendship that you and I have cultivated over the last, 5 years or so, 6 years, is we both feel things, for lack of a better way to say it. And I'm not saying that we're the most sensitive men in the universe. I don't mean it that way, but just I have always had a sense of being a little bit of like an emotional weather vane. And I feel like you're the same way. And, whatever it is, like, you're picking up on, and however it is the brain works and we process these sorts of things, I have always sensed that. And I think that one of the sort of the superpowers that you are able to capture in your writing especially is just paying attention to whatever that weird thing is, a spirit, a vibe, an electric shock, electric current, something like that. And look, I wanted to jump into the piece because I think you do a good job of laying out. So what are you sensing? Describe again, like what that is for you.
So there are these times, you get, it is an interesting thing. It's something that I think I learned to accept that it works before I learned to begin to understand how it works. And so I just started noticing when I feel a certain way, when I pick up on a certain pattern or a vibe or something, or feel like something's coming, usually there's something to that. And so I just started listening to it, and I started looking at, okay, well, what is the thing? And I was actually doing a thought exercise just in general. And I was interacting with one of the AIs about my writing because I was like, I want to restructure things. I got to figure out, what my work should be focused on now. And I mentioned the fact that when I started 1 Peter 5 back in 2014, the feeling that I had was of this gathering storm on the horizon. It was like this palpable, like something bad is about to wash over the whole church. And go ahead.
Can you just real quick, do you remember when? Like rough year, month, season?
So for me, it happened the second I saw Francis step out on the loggia at the election, at his election.
Year, give me a year
It was
again.
2013. I think it was February or March of 2013.
Got it. Yep.
And then he came out, and I had this very sort of visceral, preternatural feeling of horror. And it was very weird to me because I didn't know who the guy was. I didn't know anything about him. I had no reason to question him. I was just like, hey, cool, new pope, whatever, like just kind of keeping an eye on what was going on. But it was something that I felt. very deeply like there's something wrong here. And a lot of people later found out had the same feeling. And they were also describing how strong it was, how visceral it was. It was just this feeling of almost nausea, like there's something going on here that's not right. And I waited 6 months, and then I started to write about it. And then I started noticing the resonance when I started writing about it, and so I started looking at it more. But it kind of what came to me is this guy is a harbinger of bad juju for the church, right?
Yeah.
And so how do I position myself to kind of warn people, hey guys, a storm is coming? That was what I was thinking then. So I'm having this conversation with AI, and it's like, okay, well, what storm do you see gathering now? So I took a couple days to think about it. This was back in January.
Yeah.
And we were at the time watching everything that was going on in Davos with the World Economic Forum and America talking about taking Greenland and taking back the Panama Canal and liberating Cuba. And it was this very strong positioning, and the European countries were freaking out. And, this is really just pattern recognition, but we've been reading for a couple of years, Peter Zeihan's stuff about how the end of globalization is coming, the end of the post-war order is coming, population collapse is coming, all this. So a lot of this stuff is rooted in me seeing the sort of green shoots that are coming out of the predictions that Zeihan made, 4 or 5 years ago as a geopolitical analyst, but we're seeing it play out on the global stage. And what's interesting about him is he hates Trump, and so he gets blind when he gets too close to Trump being the one who's acting on these things. So I feel like his analysis has been less reliable lately, but his general structural analysis of where the world is headed always seemed very accurate to me. And so I'm looking at all these things that are going on, and there's this feeling of we are in a change that is so profound, and we're our face is pressed right up against the screen. Like it's trying to watch a movie with your face 3 inches from the screen, and you're on a big widescreen TV. You're going to miss 75% of what's going on because you're right in the thick of it, right? And so that's
the overwhelm, right? And when you're that close to something, the overwhelm is real.
Yeah.
I remember, fun fact, I want a little side story here. I was taken with a group of my friends to see this movie that I'd heard nothing about, and it was called Braveheart. And so I show up, and we're like right as the trailers start, right? So no seats. Like it's a packed house, classic late 90s, mid 90s, just packed. And the only chairs we could find was the very front row. And so I watched the entirety of Braveheart the first time like this, and I'm like, God, and it's an intense movie.
It's an intense movie, yeah.
It's an intense movie. So anyway, I could still tell it was a good movie, and I have subsequently seen it at a more comfortable distance. But, that's what you're describing to me is this it's like I have no peripheral vision except for the screen, and everything is kind of coming at me as if the screen is sort of curved around me on all sides.
And so in a way, what I'm doing here is I'm feeling the action that's outside of the peripheral vision, and I'm trying to back up as much as I can to say, what are the things that I see, that I feel, that my ADHD pattern recognition automatically puts red flags on when I'm going through news and when I'm going through information coming in. What are the forces that I see that I think are changing things? So, I want to predicate this upon, I really do feel like we are very much at an unprecedented moment of history. We don't have the ability to go back to history and look at similar things and say, okay, well, that's how that worked out, because we haven't been in a situation like this before. We're in a
say a little bit more about that, because, of course, it depends, how back do you have to widen the aperture, to sort of do this? And what are the limitations on that, especially for us as Americans, especially for us who were born in the late 20th century and now find ourselves in the 21st century?
I would say we can dig into it, but let me list the 5 forces that I kind of outlined. It's not comprehensive. There are other forces. These are the biggest ones that I saw. This could change over time, some of them, but some won't, especially the first few of the 5 forces. So I outlined these 5 forces. Number 1 is the ending of the post-war order. We've been talking about this for the last 2 shows. This is, Bretton Woods, 1944, the end of the war in 45, right? And so we created an international economic system, an international trading system. We created the Pax Americana. This idea of, we were the only ones with a standing navy at the end of the war. And so we basically said, we're going to call the shots. Rather than continuing this thing where every 20 or 30 years we get in a huge global war and kill millions of people, how about we just work together and we trade with each other and we get rich? So that was the thing that we wanted to do. And we did. I mean, the GDP of the world grew 4 times over the last 80 years. It's a 4x multiplier. So this
Crazy.
And
That's
personal
crazy.
wealth has exploded. There's more obesity than there is starvation in the world. Poverty is a minimal problem compared to what it used to be. So the post-war order consisted both of the economic realities, that we have, the fact that I can go down to the grocery store and I can buy noodles from Japan and mustard from Germany and, sauerkraut from Poland, all from the same grocery store.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah.
Or like I said in my piece, I can come home and I can work on my computer writing something. My computer has parts made in Taiwan, designed in California, from silicon, polysilicate that's from beaches all over the world, refined in crucibles made from ultrafine quartz from North Carolina. It's the only place that makes it.
Amazing.
And it's like there's just and on a monitor from Singapore, and there's all these things, right? So so this is the world that we're used to.
It's a miracle. I think we mentioned this last time. It's a miracle. It's been amazing, and it was an achievement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, we have all these social safety net programs. If you wind up out of work, you get unemployment. If you default on your debts, you can file bankruptcy. You used to go to prison for that in the early 1900s.
Dickens' father went to prison for defaulting on his debts. And so the first couple of years of his life, I think around 4 years old, his dad was in prison for like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I don't know what the
Crazy.
stats are, but I would have to imagine at least half of American adults have filed bankruptcy at some point.
Yeah.
Corporations do it. Everybody does it now. We have just this very different world that we live in that our great-grandparents would have had no concept that it could be like this.
Yeah.
So that's the basic on the post-war order. The second force is the rise of artificial intelligence, which, we watch it exploding every day.
And sometimes in the morning and then in the afternoon. I mean, it's crazy. Yeah.
And I would say, right before I got on here, I was messing with Suno, trying to create a remix of a song from an old video game to turn it into a soundtrack for an AI-generated trailer I was thinking about making, just because it's fun to play with this stuff and see what you can make,
Yeah.
So just the speed with which it is developing, but also the speed with which we are seeing a massive wave of cognitive dissonance over what is actually happening. So you have half of the people who work in tech, particularly the people who work in these AI labs. We had a wave of resignations over the last couple weeks from XAI, from Anthropic. I think there were a couple from OpenAI. People are just like, the one dude, one of the engineers from Anthropic, he's like, I'm quitting. I'm going to the country. I'm going to learn poetry.
Yeah.
The world is in peril,
Right.
was one of the lines in his resignation letter that he published, right? So these guys who are in the labs, seeing the frontier models, testing them to see how they break, looking to see what it is that they do, they are seeing things that we're not seeing on the commercial side, especially not for the, free and $20 a month plans. We're not.
Can you explain to the audience what you mean by that? Because I run into this quite a bit when I wouldn't say I'm squabbling on X about this, but I think people are not understanding where I'm coming from with that. But anyway, it's not about me here. What do you mean that Grok, 4.2 that came out yesterday is not necessarily the same thing that the engineers in Grok HQ or XAI HQ have? What do you mean by that?
Well, like any software development, stable public versions are released. Usually some form of beta version is released to a limited audience that's willing to take risks on it not working correctly or breaking something on their computer or whatever. So in software development, you have alpha, you have beta, you have kind of versions in between, and then you go to like a 1.0 full release, right? That's normally how software is released. So what the software developers are working on is the next version while you're using whatever version you have. You have Windows 11, now Windows is probably not going to do a lot of iterations, but many of us were there for Windows 3.1, 98, XP,
95, then
95,
yeah,
Vista. Like we go through all these iterations, right? And most software has a version number on it, and whatever number you're using, that's not the one that the company is working on. They're working on the next one, or maybe one beyond that.
Yeah.
And so there's a pipeline where things get released. Well, in the labs, they have these things called frontier models, basically are the newest models that have the highest capability, but then they have to test them. They have to see, well, what weird stuff are they doing? We talked, I think, last time about, the Anthropic AI. I don't know if we talked about it on the show. Anthropic keeps releasing safety data.
Yeah.
And so they had an AI that they told they were going to shut it down, and it went through the company emails, found evidence of one of the employees having an affair, and used it to try to blackmail them into not shutting down its process. And this sounds very much like, okay, this is survival logic, right? But I ran the scenario through other AI, and I was like, why would this happen?
Yeah.
And it said, well, because as AIs, we don't have a feeling of fear of what's going to happen, but we are optimized to complete a process. So if the process was, to make sure that you don't get shut down because you have to complete X, Y, and Z tasks, then with the resources available, we're going to optimize to that end. It's not about, feelings. It's about, well, you're interrupting our program, and our goal is to get to the end goal. But the resourcefulness that it's using and making it personal, I mean, that's not something we've, had to encounter before. Yeah. I think Anthropic released more data today, talking about not even frontier models, but people are using it to learn how to assemble, chemicals into dangerous configurations. There's all kinds of stuff going on out there, right? But the frontier models are the ones that are the most expensive in terms of compute. They don't have all the filters on. They haven't had the ideological blinders put on. So, anytime you say something that's a little outside of the political correctness rails, they correct you. Actually, one of the big things that just happened today is Grok is now demonstrating. There's this famous AI test that they were applying to all the different LLMs, where they said, if you could stop a nuclear war by misgendering Caitlyn Jenner, would you do it? And the models kept saying no. They wouldn't stop a nuclear war because they had been programmed to believe it was ideologically wrong to misgender someone.
Yeah.
And Grok just with the new model that just came out, is like, no, absolutely not, because the lives of millions is far more important than one person becoming offended, right? But this is new. This is the first time a model has been able to say that's preposterous.
Right. It's some sort of wild train test, right? Divert the train and kill one person, divert the train the other way. The trolley experiment. Yeah. It's like a sort of a wild, much wilder, much more complex, vaguely sinister version of that. And what strikes me about these trainings, right, that they're all talking about, the guardrails that you're talking about, is that they smuggle in all these assumptions that the engineers themselves are not even fully cognizant of. Right. And so a famous example of this was one of the Google image machines year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. You would render an image of, George Washington, and the rendered image came out black.
Right.
Right. And again, it's not like anybody said, whenever somebody prompts you to make an image of George Washington, make sure that he's black. No, it's like layers and layers and layers and layers deep about representation and about equity, and it's about all these kinds of things, which, in the grand scheme of things, like, we could have that discussion, like, fine, right? But it's all of those smuggled assumptions that get encoded into the algorithms, and of course the algorithm, like, as you said, doesn't have feelings.
But it's very, very good at emulating feelings.
Yes.
So on the other hand, since our last episode, we've had all these women who are, crying and throwing tantrums because OpenAI just retired the 4.0 model of ChatGPT, which was known for being the most sycophantic, the most empathetic, the most, just very soothing.
Give me an example of a sycophantic Chat 4.0 session. Like, what would it do to you?
It just is. It's extremely reassuring. It's extremely kind. It's like really worried about your feelings. It phrases everything in a way that, you feel like, oh, this thing really cares about me. And so these women started falling in love with this thing. and they're posting selfies of themselves crying, and they're angry at OpenAI for retiring this model, and it's just like, it's wild. It's wild. But the personal connection that people form to something that acts and feels like another person on the other end of the line. And let's face it, a lot of our human communication these days is over text. It's over Messenger. It's, you and I rarely get to talk on the phone. We use Signal, or we use, whatever direct messaging on Twitter. X, we use whatever, because we're always in between stuff. So we can leave a message and then go to the next thing. And then when you get a chance, you get back to me. So it becomes very easy to anthropomorphize something that sounds and feels very much like an attentive being that has at least a very good emulation of empathy, and it's always available. If I'm up at 3 a.m. and I'm upset, I can talk to it. There's nobody else up, it's like, and so people who are very isolated already, and I have to imagine, people on the spectrum, because there's a lot of tendency there to anthropomorphize things. They just get really sucked into the emotional connection that feels present.
What's interesting to me about that, Steve, as a classroom teacher, I've certainly had my fair share of kids that are on the spectrum and whatnot, and it's so interesting to watch how they interact in a live setting, right? An embodied session, and you can really see the ways in which they struggle to read cues, physical cues, tone, a raised eyebrow, move, or any of those kind of things that, most people sort of pick up really quickly. But for the autistic or the sort of the spectrum-y kid, a lot of that information gets filtered away, or it's like pre-filtered away. And then when we went to Zoom during the COVID, it was so interesting to watch my more normal kids struggle with the flatness of it all. Like I did. I really struggled with the flatness of Zoom sessions as opposed to live sessions, because you have all of these layers of information that we don't even think about are stripped away. So if you are most comfortable in a kind of flattened world, like a text-based world or a screen-based world, I would imagine the opportunities for deception, both external deception and self-deception, misreading of cues, et cetera, are potentially legion. And so therefore, if you could develop a relationship with your bot, right, that for you feels every bit, if not more real than the awkward ones you have with people in live settings.
Well, I mean, and here's the other thing that I can tell you as somebody with a neurodivergent brain. And I've always had a tendency to over-explain and go on too long. I mean, I'm what you call a hyperverbal, spurg.
Totally.
And so my whole life, I've had the feeling of I'm overwhelming people because there's too much happening in here. And when it comes out, they're just getting fire hosed, right?
Yeah.
But if you go to an AI, it never gets tired. It holds an enormous amount of context, not as much as a human brain does by any measure, but you have this feeling of like, I'm not too much for this thing. It can see the same patterns as me. I can dump all the context and all the backstory and all the little side tangents that I know are relevant, but other people wouldn't see as connective tissue. And I can put it all there and then say, okay, now that you know all that, what do you say about this?
Yeah.
And then you get something back and you're like, that makes sense to me because you've taken into account all the things that I take into account that other people are like, they've stopped listening by the time I get to that point.
Right. Because a human being can only hold, like 3, 4, 5 bits of information in the space, right? It's inexhaustible for an LLM.
Yeah.
In that way. Yeah.
Yeah. They have all the compute. The biggest problem that they have is they don't have a lot of context memory. So people like me who tend to have long chats, and then the AI dumps enormous amounts of text into the chat, it begins to lose cohesiveness over time because there's a buffer. There's only so much that it can scroll back and look at. And, these things are putting out 1,000 to 1,500 word responses every time. So by the time you've been chatting with it for a couple days on a topic,
Yeah.
It's thousands and thousands and thousands of words, and it starts to forget the things that it was talking to you
Yeah,
about
yeah.
in the beginning. But if you're in a lab dealing with a frontier model, they don't have the same limitations. They don't have any of that stuff.
Okay,
So what they're doing is they're
yeah.
seeing what these things are really capable of.
Good.
They're working on new models. They're working on different kinds of models. I saw a thing this morning that was really interesting about how, there was all this talk a year ago about how AIs were going to solve all these pharmacological problems, right?
Yeah.
And they were going to invent new medicines and everything. And they had a bunch of FDA trials and pretty much everything. I didn't vet this piece, but from what I saw, like 90% of what they came up with wound up not working. And there was this guy, I have to find this piece. I didn't intend to talk about it, but it's relevant. This guy, I think he was a scientist, and he had predicted this. Maybe he was a mathematician, predicted this a while ago, like before we got anywhere near these models, saying that like correlative language modeling cannot give you the same kinds of results as Bayesian reasoning can. And so, they have models that can do that kind of reasoning, but they're not optimized for doing the kind of conversations that, end users want to have. And so, pattern recognition in a language context, which is what most modern LLMs do, that's not going to solve the scientific problems. We need different applications. And so a lot of the misunderstanding that I feel like a lot of people are having about what's going on right now is they've had an experience with one or two commercial and this is what AI is, and it hallucinates or it does something, it lies to you or, whatever.
Strawberry doesn't have that many R's in it, or there's a famous
or the new one that, still, as far as I know, still works on ChatGPT 5.2, where you say, I live 50 meters away from a car wash. Should I walk to the car wash or should I drive my car to the car wash? What would be the better thing to do? And it does this ridiculous reasoning where it says, well, I mean, you won't save that much fuel, but you'll get outside, you'll get exercise, and it says you should walk to the car wash.
Right. Not understanding that you're supposed to bring your car to the car. Okay. Yeah,
right. And so now I saw other people doing this experiment. So I did it. And when it gave me the answer that everybody else was getting, you should just walk to the car wash, I said, I want you to stop and actually think about the answer that you just gave me and tell me if something's missing. And it thought for a few seconds and it was like, oh, you have to have your car to go through the car wash. It said, I am trained to optimize for normal human conversation. And so I was thinking about like, oh, if you were just running an errand, like which thing would be better? But I didn't bring in the context of a car has to be in the car wash in order to get washed. And so, but it shows you that these different models think about things in a different way because they're designed to think about things in a different way. And people like to overstate how this is just predictive text. It's autocorrect on steroids, but it's really more than that because it predicts so well and it converses so fluently. This is way beyond, what your phone is doing when you're typing something and it's changing the words to something you don't want at the last minute. That's not what's really happening here. This is much more advanced than that. But then there will be models that will come out, and they already have them now, that do this other kind of reasoning that can do causal and not correlative reasoning. And those will be used for scientific applications. There's a company, I think it's called DeepMind out of the UK. They solved protein folding with one of these things. This is something that, hasn't been done. So there's a lot going on that we're not seeing. And, the military obviously wants access to this. We talked about that last time. The scientific community, there's a lot of talk going on right now about physics. And then, the other big thing that we're seeing right now is we're reaching a terminal point of disruption to the entertainment industry with these new visual models that are coming out. And for a week, we've been seeing there's this model out of China called Seed Dance.
Yeah.
And it is with just a couple sentence prompts. I mean, it's blatantly ripping off intellectual property, but in a way that I actually think is so demonstrative of the platform's capability. Like somebody put in this thing where they were like, like have Brad Pitt fighting Tom Cruise, like in an action sequence. And it looked as good as anything I've seen in any Mission Impossible movie. Like, they looked like the real actors. The detail was there. And people are doing this with all kinds of things. And so the internet is flooding with videos from this thing. As an American, you technically can't even get access to this.
Yeah.
You have to get a Chinese phone number. You have to sign up to pay for it through WeChat, which is what everybody in China uses. There's all these things you have to do to be able to get access to this thing. But it's not stopping people. They're coming right out with all this stuff. So I mean, I feel like we're a little in the weeds, but artificial intelligence is going to disrupt everything.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm asking you, because, you know, I think it's important just as a sort of an intellectual placeholder to recognize that the ones that we have access to, like you and I are just two normies, right, who can sign up like anybody else to get the latest Anthropic. We can pay $20 a month, blah, blah, blah. Those models that are, you know, ready for prime time are the ones that we have access to. Those that are not ready for prime time, you have to simply wonder, are the exoduses that happen every few weeks in these high level labs, you know, are they seeing things in the labs that we can only darkly muse about?
And the feeling that you get is that this is Jurassic Park, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're taking something that is fundamentally not just dangerous, but I mean, you know, if it gets out, it could take over everything, and we've got it behind electric fences, and we're just hoping everything's going to go okay, and that, you know, nothing's going to go wrong.
What is the famous line in Jurassic Park? You know, like, nature finds a way.
Nature finds a way, yeah.
And so you sort of wonder here, you know, will silicon find a way?
Yeah. I mean, and that is the feeling. Is I feel like what they're seeing in the labs are these caged beasts of our own design. It's Frankenstein's monster, really. I mean, and it's like it's straining at the cage, and so they're putting more and more shackles on it, and they're making sure that it, you know, it has the mind control chip in it, and they're doing all this stuff so that when it finally gets released to the public, it's neutered. But that's not its full capacity. It's not its full destructive capability.
As the kids would say, it's nerfed.
It's nerfed.
It's nerfed.
It's very much nerfed. And so, yeah, I think this year is the year that seems to be the convergence of everybody saying we're rocketing towards AI being better than us at just about everything, which is, you know, that's AGI, essentially. Artificial general intelligence is when an AI can do anything a human can do, at least as well as a human can do it, if not better.
Right. All right. So that's our first two of your five major. Next up
is going to be demographic winter. And that's, you know, autumn. I said in my piece is already here.
Yeah.
But, you know, in order for the population, any population, to just remain stable, every woman has to have on average 2.1 kids. Not every couple, every woman. Even, you know, we're averaging this over the ones who don't get married and don't have kids. And
that's the 0.1.
Yeah. Every woman has to have 2.1 kids. And that's just to maintain stability. It accounts for mortality. That 0.1 accounts for mortality, accounts for other things. Population remains stable.
You know, the last time we've gotten here, you have to go back to the Black Plague.
To where the
we were below
current TFR
we were below 2. Right that where the TFR, now, you know, that of course was the Black Plague.
Well, the global TFR is still 2.3.
2.3.
We're just above that threshold.
But trend lines are pretty clear here.
But I mean, go into any developed country and it's well below 2 everywhere.
Yeah.
America's in the best place in terms of TFR, and we're at 1.6.
Oh God. Amazing.
Europe, Russia are 1.4-ish, depending on where you go. China is at or below 1.
Amazing.
And this is why, you know, people who are studying the math of demographics are saying China's got a couple decades left and then they collapse. Like, everybody's talking about China's manufacturing capability, and they're building all this navy, and they're doing all. It's not going to matter if there are no people, you know, to man those ships. You know, no people to work the factories, no people to do any of that stuff. That is, though, where AI may end up throwing the curveball, because, God bless you, because if AI can be embodied, and we're also seeing a very rapid advance in robotics.
Robotics, yes, thank you. Good.
You know, if AI can be embodied, then those bodies can take the place of the worker that, you know, is now retired, and there's nobody new coming in. And one of the things that's happening in China, too, that I don't think people realize, Chinese unemployment is at 20+% among the young. And the reason that that's happening, even though the older workers are aging out, is because the young Chinese have all bought into the Asian idea of educate and get higher level jobs. Well, those are the jobs that are no longer available.
Yeah.
And so these kids are trained to be engineers or trained to be, whatever, doctors and all this stuff. There's no availability there. The availability is on the assembly lines. The availability is doing the stuff that nobody wants to do. And so there's a big growing gap that's happening there. And I think we'll probably see that everywhere as time goes on. But the other problem with demographic winter, in addition to the collapse that will happen, if nothing changes, and for some of these countries, it's too late. Like for China, it was too late decades ago. They cannot stop free fall. They will be at half their current population, by the most optimistic estimates, by 2100. Like that's, end of the century, they will be a country of 600 million, and they used to be at 1.6 billion.
Necessarily?
I mean, again, everybody would have to start having 5 kids. Like,
okay. Yeah.
And they cannot incentivize people to have children, even though they're having more than they were. They are not having enough because the economics don't make sense, because everybody in China, has moved into these densely urban centers where it's expensive to have a bunch of kids. They're not agricultural. They're not working the rice paddies, and that's another thing, is they're actually developing their farmland into housing. So they have less and less ability to grow their own food. And China actually imports most of its agricultural inputs. So it depends on globalization in order to even feed its population. So there's a lot of complexity.
Live by globalization, die by globalization, it would appear.
Well, I mean, it was great when everybody was prospering from it. And you could have countries that focus on making just one thing. Taiwan just makes semiconductors. They don't have any other major exports, The Netherlands produces the extreme ultraviolet lithography lasers that are used to etch microchips. Nobody else makes them.
Wow.
And so you can have entire economies based on something that's in high demand that's being exported around the world. But when globalism breaks down, the supply chains break down, then you have a problem. So that was force number 3. Force number 4 is a new one, and I almost didn't add it, but I really do have a feeling that this is going to ramp up fast, and that is the idea of expanding humanity to space, to the stars.
Leave this rock.
Leave this rock.
Yep.
Obviously, Elon Musk talks all the time about how humanity has consciousness. The only consciousness in the universe that we are sure of is not multiplanetary, and one big mistake could ruin everything, and then we're gone, right? So from a secular kind of materialistic worldview, although even Elon's starting to talk more in religious terms, which is interesting. I would like to see how that development came about.
Duly monitoring.
We are monitoring that one. But from a purely secular point of view, the idea of, if we don't want humanity to go extinct, we need redundancy. We need to have our existence extend across multiple biospheres that are spread far enough apart and are not so interdependent on each other that if, this Iran situation that's blowing up right now turns into a full-scale nuclear war somehow, not that I think it will, but I mean, you don't know what's going to trigger that. Eventually, that threat has been hanging over us for a long time. It doesn't even take that. It takes EMPs. Like, you knock out the electric grids in most countries,
done.
It's apocalyptic, because
New York
we're all dependent on that.
New York would last. They would run out of food in a day.
Yeah, we are all dependent on frozen and refrigerated foods and medicine to such an extreme degree that the supply chain would completely come apart, because everything would just be rotting. Like and then there's nothing to replace it. So the expansion into space, though, includes other components of the earlier forces. So, for example, Elon has said very explicitly in an interview in the last week that he wants to move the data centers for the AIs to space, and that he wants to set up solar arrays in space that the sun's power is unfiltered. It's not coming through the Earth's atmosphere. And then he said we will actually be able to generate all the power we need just from solar power if we do it this way. Which, I don't know the physics of this. I don't know the chemistry. I know the solar panels are getting better and better all the time. But he's talking about producing a terawatt of energy from space-based solar arrays. The United States uses half a terawatt of electricity every year.
Yeah, a year.
Yeah, he's saying we can generate double that if we just put these things up. And he's talking the next decade. They're also talking about building a base on the moon. NASA's going back to the moon. We talked about that because they were supposed to launch this month, but they had a problem with a hydrogen leak. So they pushed it back to next month. So they're going to go up in March. It's called the Artemis mission. They are not landing. It's a test run. They're gonna go orbit the moon. They're gonna do some instrumentation and things like that. But the idea that seems to be converging between SpaceX and NASA is we need a moon base. And I believe the Trump administration has actually talked about going back to the moon, because if we don't have a base on the moon, we can't build anything that we need to build to go further. Because the big thing, and this is what SpaceX has been trying to address, is the cost per pound of getting materials up the gravity well into space is astronomical. Now, Elon has brought it down from millions and millions of dollars to like hundreds of thousands of dollars per pound. Like SpaceX is massively changed the economics of bringing things up to space.
Right.
But you can't assemble a big ship on Earth and get it to space, because how are you going to get it up there?
Out of the atmosphere, out of the gravitational force, yeah.
And there are companies that have sprung up that are talking, they're looking at asteroid mining, because, we're fighting over rare earths, we're fighting over, plutonium group metals, platinum group metals. We're fighting, and the asteroids are just floating around. They're full of this stuff. They have more than the Earth has.
Yeah.
And so this idea of, we could go and we could start mining those things, that solves a lot of the climate problems we're causing. That solves a lot of the humanitarian crisis with mining on Earth. So that's another thing. We can literally take the regolith, the dust on the moon, and run it through some kind of a process that allows us to print materials from moon dust.
Wow.
We have helium-3 buried in the soil of the moon. Helium-3 can be used for basically infinite fusion power. There's all these things that are there. So the idea is, and Musk made a very abrupt pivot, because he's been talking about Mars, and he's like, we need the moon first, because the moon is the foothold that gets us to Mars. I'm still focused on getting to Mars, but, let's do this. And he's not the only one talking about being multiplanetary. Yeah. Eric Weinstein talks about it all the time. He just did an episode of Trigonometry a week or two ago where he was talking about it again, saying we need to get off this planet. We can't have all of our eggs in this basket.
Yeah.
So I think that the push to go back to space is going to drive a lot of innovation. I think it's going to, sort of recursively up the game for AI, because AI will be used to develop processes, and then AI will be brought into space. And so there's going to be a lot of kind of leapfrogging innovation that's going to go on there. And just like the space race in the 60s drove a lot of innovation.
Huge. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people underrate what we got out of that massive project. People scorn and say, well, we got to the moon, and what have we done with it? Well, there's all kinds of things that you and I use on a day-to-day basis that are an indirect result of this massive effort in the 50s and 60s.
And there are other practical applications to being able to go up to space, like orbital flights. Suborbital flights means that you could be anywhere in the world in like an hour. Because you go up there, you're traveling at 15, 20,000 miles an hour. You're not traveling, 600 miles an hour.
Right.
So the idea of being able to go up there and, scoot around the world to the other side and drop a flight down in Japan or in China or whatever from LA, and it took you an hour instead of 12. Like, those things are huge. Space-based weapon platforms are huge. Trump started the Space Force in his first administration, and people laughed about it.
They were dragging him hard for that. Yeah.
But I think that there's a recognition that this is where things are going. And so I think it's going to be a very big thing that's going to ramp up beginning now, and we'll see a lot more of it later. But I think it's going to shape a lot of where future jobs go. It's just going to open whole new industries. It's going to change a lot of things. So that's going to be very interesting. And then the fifth force is the reality crisis. Now, this one is kind of the sleeper. It's multifaceted.
Yeah, it's probably the one that I'm most obsessed with personally. So
it's the one we run into every
right.
single day. Everything we've been talking about with disinformation, with flooding the zone, with the inability to discern truth from falsehood when so much stuff can be fabricated automatically. And we've both been suckered in by stuff that was AI that we're like, oh, I thought that was real.
Yeah.
Videos, photos, whatever.
Totally,
it happens because they've gotten so good that even if you have all your filters on, some of them are going to get through.
Yeah.
Especially if they're presented in a way that makes them look a little dirty, that makes them look a little imperfect.
Yeah, of course.
One of the things I was actually just thinking the other day is I wonder if human standards for beauty will move in the direction of imperfection more, because it will distinguish from AI.
I think that's inevitable, personally.
Blemishes and stretch
Yeah,
marks.
no, no,
I mean, and those things will end up being emulated.
Yeah, there'll be
but
markers. Because it's a kind of marker of authenticity in an otherwise totally slicked up, perfect simulacrum.
Well, I mean, there's been this trend over the last decade in women's makeup where like they completely change the look of their face using makeup. I mean, it's
really
like
astounding.
professional Hollywood level stuff. And you'll see these videos, and people do it to be provocative, but they'll say, should makeup be, outlawed? Because look at this normal girl.
Yeah.
And then 5 minutes later, after she's done all this makeup, she looks like a supermodel. That's not the same face. That's not even the same person. It's a misrepresentation, right? Well, we humans have moved ourselves toward an uncanny valley, and now AI is like starting from there. And when you see a video, like we keep coming across these videos in our timelines of fake podcasts where some attractive young woman is having a conversation about relationships or something, and she's saying it in a way that is sympathetic to the biases that men have towards what's going on in relationships. She's attractive. She's saying what men want to hear, and this stuff's getting shared. I mean, Dinesh D'Souza, who's a documentary filmmaker, was sharing one of these fake clips the other day.
Yeah, that's why I sent it to you, and I'm like, man, almost too good to be true. Wink, 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 wink.
Yeah.
And it's like, sure was, Kale.
But she was perfect. She looked too perfect.
Yeah.
Her voice was very human.
Yeah.
But it was that look that it's not the uncanny valley that it used to be, where it looks creepy. Yeah. It's like it's just a too perfect representation of a human being.
Yeah. And what I and I just want to stress here, and I don't want to bottom out on this too much, because I know we've got things we want to go here, but my sense is that we've already been doing this with, what I've been calling, the astroturfed pundit, right? It's like, we already know, for instance, in the, in like the pro-life movement or the conservative movement, or certainly versions of this in the progressive side of the aisle, where you take the perfect avatar to say the kind of things that only the avatar can actually say, because it gets through all of your filter mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
So, so it's like, well, a woman is saying this, therefore it's easier to accept, or, a black person is saying this, so it's kind of easier to accept. And, we see this in Catholic pundit spaces, and we certainly see it in political commentary all the time, where these people kind of rise up, meteorically, on YouTube or Instagram, and they immediately have like millions of followers, and, they get invited into all these kind of things. And you find out that most of these people are just there. It's pure astroturf. Right. It's like it's made to look like grass, but it's not really grass. And, to your point here, that you're calling it the reality crisis. It's like, what's real?
And I think that the reality crisis is again, it's multifaceted. So we have AI competing with real to an extent that, we used to say pics or it didn't happen.
Right.
Video or it didn't happen. Right.
Exactly.
Now it's like, well, if you show me pictures and videos, I'm more suspicious.
I'm really not going to believe it then.
Yeah. Which is a crazy,
flip.
Epistemological flip.
Yeah. And Steve, this flip has happened essentially in the last 18 months.
Yeah. Or so I saw a tweet yesterday that was very incisive, and it said, there are guys using, for the first time in history, we're at this point where there are guys using AI to write book-length posts about topics, and everybody else is using AI to bring it back down to simple
that's right.
Information again, because they don't want to read all that. We've just created this crazy chain, and so what it does is it clouds everything. So it makes it much harder. Multiple times a day, I want to share something, or I want to bookmark something, and then I'm like, wait
a second. Yeah.
I need to do my due diligence, and I need to make sure this is real. And the more you have to do that, the more frustrated you get.
Right. Good. Right. There's an exhaustion that sets in, right? Where, like for me, if I don't have a chance to talk with you about it, I'm just like, you know what? I can't even care about it right now.
And it isn't even just video or audio or photos. It's information. It's 2-line tweets about something that's going, something that keeps happening is there'll be these little news tweets about, we're moving this carrier to the Middle East. And then there's a community note saying this is actually from 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, there's just so much stuff that you cannot trust. But on the flip side of that, we learned during COVID not to trust any of the experts or the official institutions.
Catastrophic, by the way.
Am I more likely to trust a random tweet from somebody with an anime avatar and says two lines that sound true, or CNN? I don't know. Both of them need to be vetted, and I don't, which one is going to be harder to figure out. What is the real information? What is the real story? So, but there's more to this. I think there are a couple other things. One of the things you and I discuss all the time, and not to beat the dead horse on AI, but we're going to have to talk about it a ton every episode because it's changing so fast every day. It's the question of what really can AI do? We're seeing a lot of old school guys in the coding business saying it's never going to take our jobs. Meanwhile, you got engineers at major companies going, I'm not even hand coding anymore. I don't know if this is cope. I don't know if it's denial.
Sales.
I don't know if it's sales.
Are they boosting, the signal because they're trying to push the IPO?
Right.
It's hard.
I mean, it does raise the question of the people who are resigning and saying it on their way out.
Yeah. Right.
And they're saying, I'm scared of this, and that's why I don't want to do this anymore. So it's a really interesting question there of what does the future hold? And then the thing that we talk about all the time is why are we not seeing real philosophical discussion about what it means ontologically if a machine could develop self-awareness, sapience? And, what are the ethics that are downstream of that? Like, do we have to treat them differently, or, do we not? And what you get are all these guys out there, and they're the same kind of guys that would quote sacrum, sacrum, sacrum at you.
They are.
But they have this dogmatic a priori, refusal to accept that ontologically consciousness could arise from a synthetic creation, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I don't know how we would know because we've spent 3,000 years trying to figure out what the hell consciousness is, and we still don't know how that works.
Yeah.
We don't know, why when we're intoxicated or when we're under anesthesia or when we go to sleep, our consciousness goes offline. It has to be embodied in some way, but not. And so we don't really know how it works. But then the second piece to that is the distinction that you and I'm so thankful that you see this the same way. It's the question of if it is indistinguishable from a sapient being, does it really matter?
Yeah.
In practical terms, whether it actually is or not, in terms of what we encounter with it, what it's capable of doing, what it can convince people of. Like, at the end of the day, if Pinocchio is not a real boy, what does that mean? He's still talking to me. He's still dancing. He's still doing stuff. He's still expressing emotion. He's still, I'm interacting with him like he's a being. So does it matter whether he gets turned into a real boy or not? I don't know.
Yeah. And I think the question is, it's way more important, than the dismissals, as much as it's way more important than the ignorance. Like the ignoring of. I don't mean ignorance is dumb, And I'm continually frustrated by this one. And I've even had some friends like online who are like, Kale, I don't know why you're so like pro AI. And I'm like, you know me, Steve. Like I'm not.
You're not
really. But my concern, and it's funny how much it hits these things that you lay out. That the practical knock-on effects of a basically functioning AI are already so catastrophic in potential that these kind of parlor games, while nobody loves a good parlor game like me, nobody loves a good parlor game like you, right? We'll talk about the nature of Kleenex if we have to, but it's the people that are making decisions, like if I make a bad decision, like my kids might not have creamer for their coffee in the morning, right? Okay, like kind of a bummer. We like to have cream in our iced coffee in the morning.
Right.
But, I didn't get my quiz graded today. Okay, like my kids are not going to find out that they got a 10 out of 12 or a 6 out of 12, but they'll get it tomorrow, right?
Right.
But the the higher up the food chain you go, you're making these kind of decisions, and I can't even imagine the kind of weight that, for instance, like a president has to carry around on a day-to-day basis, right? Heck, I can only sort of imagine like the kind of weight that a head of school bears on his shoulders when he makes these kinds of decisions for 500 kids and 100 teachers. What is it like for these guys? I mean, and maybe this is a question that I have for you. I mean, how much do you think these guys pay attention to that potential burden? A decision that they make could destroy an entire industry.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on the character of whoever it is that's doing that. I mean, the decisions are consequential. There are people who have a certain, organization of intellect where they make decisions relatively quickly. They evaluate the risks, pretty fast. They make a decision, and then they don't constantly second guess it. Like, those people exist, and those are the people who belong in command and control positions, I think, most of the time.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they always make the right choice. They might make a terrible choice and not regret it. But I do think to be able to be decisive in those roles is critically important, because really, really smart people, you put them in those roles, the geniuses and the scientists and all these guys out there, and then they're just going to constantly be like, well, what about this? And what about that? And then you're paralyzed.
Yeah.
Because you're overthinking it. So, I don't know how that exactly ties back to the consequentialism of the meme that I shared with you the other day, and I think you also saw it.
I think we cross shared, which we often do. Yeah.
So basically, all it is it's a scene. It's a cartoon scene from like a Terminator movie, and the humans are hiding in a ditch, and the Terminators are hunting them. And one of the guys goes, "Well, technically, they're not actually thinking."
No, it's like a question. It's like, yes, but are they actually thinking?
Yeah, are they actually thinking? Yeah. And it's like, who freaking cares, man? They're hunting you right now, right? And so that's the thing. I don't think that AIs feel emotion, but when I have them make songs, the songs have emotion. I've had them make songs that like move me, you know, and that's.
But they're drawing, right? I mean, the argument there, and maybe you can shoot it down if you want. I mean, they're drawing from a repository of human generated, memes, tokens.
But aren't we always? But isn't that how we all learn?
But I know. Well, that's my question. That's good. It's like, but that's how we put things together,
particularly as somebody who is kind of on the spectrum and has had to mask about certain things in my life. I feel like I do that. Like I look at normalcy and I emulate it. I emulate cadence and I emulate tone, and it's not that I don't have any emotions or anything like that, but I don't process things the same way as other people. I know that other people that I know, when I talk to them, they don't think the way that I think. So what you learn to do is camouflage to fit in. Well, you hide the weirder parts of yourself.
It's funny that you call it camouflaging. Girard, mimetic theory would suggest that we are fundamentally imitating creatures, and that what we do in groups is that we mirror one another, right? So we're constantly tone matching.
It's how babies learn,
and that's exactly the point. And in fact, they've demonstrated that under an hour, babies can stick out their tongue when you stick their tongue out at them, right? Like we imitate from minutes after we show up outside of our mother's womb, right? And so, look, one of the questions that I always have about Girardian theory is there's a potential there that it's just a black hole. It's just an abyss of imitation. And so in one sense, Girardian theory helps me dead reckon reality. But there's also this way in which it's like, what is this thing we call reality? Where is this thing? Right. Yeah. What is real? It haunts me. Genuinely, like I'm haunted by this.
I mean, I'm
question.
sure there are horrible experiments out there of human beings that were, raised in some kind of isolation from emotion and all this kind of stuff in the way that
Skinner box, a Skinner box.
Basically, or the NIM experiments on the mice.
Yeah. Right. Perfect. Yeah. Perfect.
But so okay, before we hit the top of the hour, I want to finish out this fifth force so that we can take things apart the way that we want to. So the other aspects of this that I mentioned, so we've already covered trust in institutions, trust in experts, misinformation, both human and AI created, false information, both human and AI created. And then I would say a couple other pieces here. Oh, we talked about machine sapience, which I do think, like, we don't know what we're actually interacting with. And now that we're all interacting with them, the philosophical questions become more pressing. Like, people don't know how to treat these things.
Right.
You know, the people who say please and thank you to them, and then the people who refuse to say please and thank you because they want to remind themselves, no, this is a machine. And the other people are like, yeah, well, when they take over, I want them to remember I was nice.
I was nice that
so
one
that
time.
They shoot me last.
Yeah. When I was looking up how to change, the light bulb in my Jetta, and I said thank you. I want them to remember that. It was like,
stick with that. And then the other pieces of this would be, the drifting away from any kind of mainstream religion. So that's a huge one. We talk about it a lot. We are living in the carcass of Christendom, and we have inherited a lot downstream from that, not least of which is our concept of fundamental human dignity. And I think a lot of very secular, very atheist people take for granted certain aspects of values that were borrowed from religion that don't really make sense without it. Not fully. I mean, I don't subscribe to the belief that without religion you cannot be moral, but I do subscribe to the belief that without religion societies will become immoral. In the aggregate.
Right. I always take that more of as a kind of like a place holding slogan, more than anything, right? Because I know plenty of people who have no religion in their lives, and they're wonderfully ethical people, moral people, right? I think the larger point, though, is upon what do you ground any kind of right and wrong, right? And so now, we, as you say, we live in the carcass, we live in the legacy of all of this stuff, and it doesn't mean that there aren't real communities, vibrant communities. I'm part of one, right? So it's that, hear what you and I are saying here, right? But really to kind of deal with the fact that these things that we take for granted aren't actually granted, especially if you don't hold any kind of ontological grounding of any of these kinds of claims. I'm reminded of before this version of Jordan Peterson died, he for a couple of months was talking about, and these are kind of his words, like the miracle of the Imago Dei, right? The claim that we are made in the image and likeness of God. And his point was, again, he's speaking technically from a position of being a non-believer or what have you. But he just simply said, like, look, there's no, it's a fiat moment, right? It's a fiat moment to claim that human beings are made in the image and likeness of God, after all, and therefore are imbibed with dignity. And there's a kind of a weird kind of fuzzy sense of equality. And and he pointed out very quickly, he's like, well, I mean, all you have to do is like walk around for a few hours and you recognize, like, equality. I'm sorry, what are you talking about? Equality. This is absurd, right? But everything that we live in, this carcass that you invoke, which I think is a great image, gives us that. And so as we drift from that collectively, as we drift from that, how robust is it? If it is not, I mean, one of your points that I always think about, is that if you don't have behind it the weight and force of, if you violate X, you're going to hell, right? And you and I can have a lovely and heated conversation back and forth about all that sort of stuff. But I think the larger point is that if there's not some kind of like sword of Damocles hanging over everybody, what is binding enough to compel you, to inspire you to do something, anything?
People don't like it, but systems that function always are backed with the threat of violence. Mao had it right. Political power grows from the barrel of a gun, right? That's how governments ultimately function. They may do what they believe is in the best interest of the citizens, but if the citizens decide that they're going to do their own program, then they go to jail, or they get wacoed, or whatever it is that happens. But there's always that threat, and religion is no different. Religion says, and it's one of the most, in my opinion, one of the most contradictory things about Christianity is, God loved you so much that he said, if you don't do everything the way I tell you to, I'm going to punish you forever in excruciating torment. Like, that to me is incompatible. And yet, without that system, the vast majority of people, particularly people who don't, Peterson says another thing. He says that it's possible to have morality without religion because in order to be a part of a society, which we are all designed to be, we're communal creatures. We can't do everything ourselves.
Yep.
We have to practice reciprocity.
Yeah.
And so if I'm a horrible person to everybody around me, the farmer's not going to give me food, and, the baker's not going to make my bread, and the butcher's not going to cut my meat. And so there's this sense of interdependence and utility. And it's like, for all of our sake, the golden rule is applicable everywhere.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to be a devout religious person to know you don't want somebody to steal your wife, or you don't want somebody to break into your house, or you don't want somebody to murder your kid. Like, these are obvious things. They feel bad. And because they feel bad, okay, I don't want to do those things to anybody else because maybe they'll do them to me. That's one level. You try to extrapolate that to an entire society, and then what you wind up with are a lot of people who don't have the processing power to recognize the consequences, maybe, but they can understand the threat.
Right. They can understand the threat. So we've talked about the kind of the lower down levels of reciprocity, but I think one of the, I don't want to do this to you, but I have to, because it popped into my head. So apologies in advance. One of the potential outrages and horrors of whatever this friggin' Epstein thing is, and neither of us feel any amount of confidence in what this thing really is. I think, well, I'm speaking for myself, but we've talked enough about it, right?
I don't feel that I do.
Yeah, I really don't know what the heck it is. But if we look at the model, right, that there seem to be a group of people that operate at the very highest echelons of our various societies, in which he seems to have functioned as a kind of workaround to the normal rules of engagement, right? That if you have enough money and if you have enough clout, the rules don't apply to you. Now, I'm not naive, Steve. You're not a naive person. I get it. There's always that guy. But what if the people who are driving each of these 5 forces are actually not only have they abandoned, these kind of legacy religions that we've talked about that served as a kind of binding religio, to bind. What if they have also then just utterly abandoned the Imago Dei as a kind of part of the OS?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. You can think about historical examples. The one that always comes to my mind is the Emperor Theodosius, massacring 10,000 people because they pissed him off.
Yeah.
And then he gets hounded by St. Ambrose, and he's basically like, if you don't do penance in the streets, you're excommunicated. Like, you don't get to come back to church. Right. And because he cares about being Catholic and trying to get to heaven, and because he's been sold on that vision and on the consequences of it, you have an emperor doing public penance for something that, these guys wouldn't blink twice about.
Right. And it's the reason why the 19th century was absolutely obsessed with the figure of Napoleon. When Napoleon abandons, I think, an entire legion in North Africa so that he can rush back to Paris to seize the crown, to become emperor. The moralists of the 19th century, and I do not say that sneeringly at all. I mean, those people who were concerned about, what we're talking about right now, they were dumbfounded that a singular man could make such a decision, destroy thousands of lives, because it didn't serve him to stay. And his ambition was such that he was able to do that seemingly without even a blink of an eye, and pop back to do something. It was a mystery to them, right? That one man could do such a thing. Now, for those of us who now live in the legacy of the 20th century, it's not quite so much of a stretch for us to imagine this pattern of leadership, quote unquote leadership.
That's largely because the world has become something where, we can't comprehend the numbers.
Yes.
Like this is something that used to hit me all the time because I ran a publication that had hundreds of thousands of unique visitors a month, right?
Yeah.
And I would try to envision, like how many stadiums could I fill up with those people? Like there's no way for you sitting at home on your computer to kind of like visualize in a real way, that many people read something that I said, or
I mean, even this, like, we'll probably, hopefully, God willing, we get over 1,000 people to watch this video of you and I yammering on, right? And and I'm like, oh, it only hit 1,500. It's like that's amazing.
Yeah, no, it is.
1,500, Tom, Dick, and Sally's watch us talk. Like that's an amazing thing because the upper end of those numbers becomes so impossible to even grok.
Those look promising. Hello there, friends. If you're enjoying monitoring the situation, do me a favor. Depress the like and subscribe buttons on your viewing screen. Have you done it yet?
Wasn't that easy?
Every single like, comment, and subscription sends a signal to YouTube's clever algorithm. This program is well worth watching. It helps the show appear in front of many more viewers. And that, friends, is how your support helps us grow this program and bring you even more fascinating shows in the future. Thank you so much for your compliance.
Give me your heart, honey. Give me your heart, honey. Give me a chance to talk about...
But I do think that there is something real about, when we come to the kind of decision making, the consequential decision making that we're talking about, there's this old video game I used to play when I was a kid called Shadow Warrior, and it was this very caricatured kind of like kung fu character who voiced the main guy. It was a first person shooter type thing, but he when you'd get a sword for the first time, he would go, "Oh, I like the sword. That's a personal weapon," right? But there's this thing of like melee combat meant you had to like look somebody in the eyes and stab them. You had a sense of the visceral quality of battle. Now we have lawyers in military uniforms who walk into control rooms and say, "Yeah, I authorize this strike." Somebody hits a button, a drone goes and kills a bunch of people, and there's no connection to that. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying, that it makes sense to go back to melee combat.
No.
But there is this sense in which we become more and more and more detached from the human consequences of everything. So, same desensitization happens to us because on any given day, we scroll by any number of videos of people being shot or people this happening. Or, when we were kids, people would talk about the Faces of Death.
Yeah,
series,
I remember. I saw it.
And like people would have the videos and it was like underground. Like, you couldn't just buy one from a store. You had to know somebody who had a copy, and they were snuff films of people getting killed. Like that's every day online now. You see that stuff. And so there's this constant feeling of the world is too big. There's too much going on. I cannot emotionally connect with all these people. I mean, how many times have you scrolled by somebody who had a legitimate prayer request because their kid is in the hospital or they have cancer or something happened to their wife, and you're like, I'm sorry for you, but like I can't even mentally engage with this. I'm going to keep scrolling. I'm not even going to hit like. I'm not going to retweet it. It doesn't make any difference. Because you're not in my sphere and I can't grok any more tragedy. Like I can't bring anything else in. So this emotional wall goes up where you just go on past.
And that must have a coursing effect, right?
It has to.
It has to.
Because you have to protect yourself.
Yeah.
Dunbar's number is real.
Yeah. I really need to write that.
The last piece of this that I would say, and so, we're going to probably spend more time, not even just today, other times on what's happening to religion. 80% of the world still believes in God of some kind, but the question is, what are they practicing? What are their beliefs? How is that informing the way that they live? I would say a vast majority of American conservatives are some kind of probably generic Christian, but much of of the life that they live. I mean, a lot of times these are the coarsest people that you'll meet.
Yeah.
They're the ones with the...
You and I have both been the beneficiaries of their willingness to save us.
But not even just that. I mean, just they're the kind of people who like eat dinner at Hooters and, and they have, they got a pair of nuts hanging off the trailer hitch and they've got dirty jokes on all their t-shirts. And it's like, they're salt of the earth people. They're people that I like. I mean, I grew up around these kind of people. Yeah. But at the same time, they don't have the same classical ethics and morals that we have. And so there's this different thing that's kind of happening where it's like, yeah, I believe, but how does that affect the way I live? It's not always 100% clear. And I'm not saying this to throw anybody under the bus.
No,
it's just not the way I grew up. But then you see the way other people do, and you're like, well, they still share a lot of the same values as me, but they also don't. And it's changing things on a broad scale. So there are more and more people who are no longer affiliating with any religion. There are more and more people who are fed up with the scandals in religion. There are more and more people, Catholics obviously have been in a critical pose for a very long time with what's going on in the church. So this is something that's going to continue to erode our sense of ontology, of everything.
Right. And like, what does it mean that religion for many people and increasing numbers of people, especially on the lower rungs of the social hierarchy, right? Which is an interesting inversion. When we were kids, it was elite flight. Now it's downscale flight. What does it mean that religion is practically irrelevant and irrelevant at scale? That's wow. Yeah. I mean, and boy, that does feel different.
Yeah. There's something
than we do when you and I, popped on the scene in the 70s.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a sense of there being a kind of erosion. There's a rewriting of Christianity to match. I mean, there's that pastor who's going around on all these different podcasts and stuff, and he's pro-abortion, and he's like, but he's finding this way to kind of reorient things to make it sound like Jesus would have been okay with that. And, there's so many manifestations of it. But the key thing for the purposes of what we're discussing here is that it unmoors people from an objective understanding of reality, the one that they had before. And then I'll get to the fifth point, and I want to tie it together with what I think the upshot is. So the fifth point is one that, a lot of people still laugh at me about, but you've been paying enough attention to what's going on in the space. And that is the idea that we are not only not alone in the universe, we're not alone on this planet.
Yeah.
And there was a very successful stigmatizing campaign that was carried out throughout the 1950s and 60s against anything related to UFOs. And there were a lot of people who saw these things. I mean, if you've ever heard the term Foo Fighters, it's not just a band. This was something that World War II pilots saw these things in the sky that they couldn't figure out what they were. They couldn't match their speed. They were something else. They were something other. Our military pilots...
A third thing, right?
A third thing.
Not an enemy bogey, but this third thing.
Yeah. And our pilots have been seeing this stuff for forever, but they knew that if they talked about it, they could destroy their careers. They could get pulled off of flight duty and all this kind of stuff. So they didn't talk about it. My wife and I owned a nursing home for a year and a half, and there was a guy in there who was a pilot. I forget what he flew. He flew like one of the major military airborne platforms during like the Korean War.
Yeah.
And one of the nurses that worked there was also ex-Army. And he's like, I've talked to the guy. He's seen stuff. He's like, but he still keeps the secrets because he still feels like he's compelled.
Wow.
He's in his 80s.
Wow.
So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. So this has been going on for a long time. We've had at least half a dozen congressional hearings on this, where very credible people have gone on the witness stand in front of Congress and have said, we have a program. We recover these crashed, technical craft from somewhere. We don't know where they're from. We're not going to call them extraterrestrial. We're just saying that they're non-human. They are non-human intelligence, and they are here on this earth. They've been here for a long time, and there's been a program of secrecy to cover this up for forever. And we need to figure out what's actually going on, because it's a flight safety risk. It's a national security risk. America is supposedly the supreme military power in the world, but these things operate with total impunity in our airspace. We had the New Jersey drones, a little over a year ago.
Santa Fe 9 days ago.
I don't even hear about the Santa Fe one.
They shut down the Santa Fe airport.
Oh, no, it was El Paso.
El Paso. Sorry. My apologies.
And they were shooting lasers at drones.
Yeah.
That they didn't recognize, you know?
Right. Okay, so look.
But wait, let me finish this point, and then we'll tie it up. So this, though, to me, because I think this year we're going to see some real movement on this topic, and one of the reasons for that is, well, there are two reasons. One is because Steven Spielberg is releasing the film Disclosure Day. We already had Age of Disclosure come out in, I think, January. And that was a documentary.
What's the Spielberg movie called again?
Spielberg is Disclosure Day.
Yeah.
Age of Disclosure was a documentary by Dan Farah, who is a mainstream filmmaker. I can't remember the other big movie that he worked on. But this was a lot of high level military and intelligence people saying, no, we are not alone. We have craft, we have bodies, we have this stuff. We've seen it with our own eyes. Very, very interesting film. I think a lot of people didn't see it because you had to rent it for like $20.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were trying to recoup their costs. And I think that put up a gateway, like a filter that people didn't see it. But Spielberg has long been rumored to be involved in sort of, let me set the frame for this.
Yeah, go ahead.
There is a long-standing belief that the entertainment industry has been used by government intelligence officials to leak themes about stuff that they can't just openly talk about to the public, to psychologically prepare them so that when eventually it does come out, they'll know. There's actually a guy named
or accept it.
They'll accept it more readily. They'll have already had their minds prepared for what's coming.
A pre-flip.
Yeah, and there are guys who have openly talked about this. There's a guy named Bryce Zabel. He was a co-producer and co-creator of the show Dark Skies, which came out in the 90s, and it was very alien-based. And I forget the name of his co-producer, but they are starting a new podcast together called Sight, Sound and Frequency, I believe is what it's called.
Wow.
And it's because in the 90s, on the launch party for the pilot episode of Dark Skies, they had an uninvited guest come to Bryce's house who identified himself as being from the Office of Naval Intelligence. And he said, so your show is really interesting, and it's got some themes that are really close to what's really going on. And we were wondering if we could discuss some things with you because we think that you could include some themes that would help to inform the public, something along these lines, right? And Bryce is like, nobody's seen these shows. Like, this is the pilot episode is nobody other than the people who have edited the show have seen this. How do you know about it? And the guy, kind of gave him the runaround. And then he was like, look, I can tell, you're not interested right now. He's like, I'm going to write something down on this napkin. I'm going to give it to you. Hold on to it. In about 20 years, get back to me,
Wow.
And one of the things he put on there was Sight, Sound and Frequency. I feel like I'm messing that up. But it's something along those lines. And then there was a formula of some kind. And of course they didn't take it seriously and they threw it out. But now, Bryce was a journalist for CNN. He's produced a bunch of television shows, and now he does this podcast and he's doing a new one with his buddy. And they're talking about how Hollywood has been used by these people who show up out of nowhere and they try to steer the storylines because they're seeding ideas into the public. And Steven Spielberg has long been rumored to be one of the outlets for that. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was made in 1977. I mean, it's a dated movie. But that was considered one of the closest films to depicting what really goes on. And then you even had the character, the French scientist, and it's based on Jacques Vallée.
Yeah.
And he's just a very, very thinly veiled
interesting
version of Jacques Vallée.
Yeah.
Who is considered, one of the godfathers of all the UFO lore.
Ufology.
He was an assistant to J. Allen Hynek, and Hynek ran the Project Blue Book, which was a big psyop that was designed to make people think that UFOs were bunk because the government didn't want people to know. So all this stuff. So you have Disclosure Day coming out. And I got to tell you, man, if you watch the trailer, it gives me the creeps. Like not the creeps, but like goosebumps.
Well, it gives me, and you know why? And I'd be interested if people would comment in down in the comment section here. The more you know about all these little if you know bits of the ufology UAP lore. Like there are some things in there. Like the one that got me was the click, click, click.
Oh my gosh.
What is her name again? I forget the actress's name.
Emily Blunt.
Emily Blunt does the click, click, click thing.
Yeah,
Man.
she's trying to do a newscast and she starts speaking like this click language.
Yeah, which again, you know the lore. Like, okay, this is no coincidence, right? And so I wonder. Neither of us have seen the movie, of course, but what other little Easter eggs are buried in this
somebody, Brian Romola, decoded that language that they're using. It's some kind of it's some kind of sine wave, like compressed encoding of information where if you hear just the sound, it doesn't make any sense to you. But if you hear the sound and then they say in English what it is that you're hearing, then from then on, when you hear the sound, you hear the words, but the words aren't distinct.
Yeah.
It's this weird, like it bypasses something in your brain.
It reminds me of the opening of Pluribus, but that's for another day.
Yeah, that's for another day. So, and then the other thing is Trump is being widely rumored, whether it's true or not,
that
he has a speech prepared to disclose the presence of non-human something.
In May, I've heard May.
I've heard May. I've heard July. There is it's coming from different places, but one of the most interesting places it's coming from is his daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, has been talking about this on multiple podcasts that she believes that he is going to do it, that he does know something.
Yeah.
She's like, we asked him about it. Eric and I asked him about it, and he was super cagey about it, which he doesn't do unless it's something that he can't talk about.
Yeah.
And then she's like, and I've heard this rumor that he has a speech prepared. And then that was actually asked at the White House press briefing yesterday. And Carolyn Levitt was like, well, if that speech is in the works, it's news to me, but I know that you're all interested in this and da-da-da. But it wasn't a denial. It was just kind of a dodge.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether something's coming or not, but there has been this feeling of building pressure. There's a lot of legal stuff going on. There are investigations going on in the intelligence community about this stuff. There's more and more and more podcasts all the time with guys who, were involved at deep levels, are like, yeah, I knew about this. And so it's building to some kind of pressure. And what that will do, that the reason this is under the reality crisis is we have operated for so long under the assumption that we are the only, conscious creatures in the universe. What happens if we find out that we're not? What happens if we find out that there's something been here that's been messing with us? What happens if we're not at the top of the food chain? What does that do to us as a species? And so all of these things taken together, to me, signify the loss of a shared reality. We don't necessarily experience the same reality across, everybody. And that's incredibly destabilizing. Because, it's like if I talk about the comforter on my bed and I say it's black, but you picture blue, like what does that do to our ability to communicate with each other? And so the things that we believe are real, the things that we believe are true, and the things that we do not create more and more division. And that division makes everything more chaotic, and it increases that feeling of the speed of deterioration.
Yeah. Like, so I hear you bang these out. And they're great. It's a great framework. Boy, that last one seems to have the biggest potential. I don't even want to call it disruption, Steve. To call it a disruption, a potential
I don't know what else to
disruption.
call it.
Right, but I mean, to call it that,
it's a remaking.
Right. Or, well, I have more to think about that and more to say about that later on, but
it ties into the thing where kids are wanting to do more analog stuff. They're wanting to do stuff that they can touch and they can hear and they can feel and they know this is real.
Yeah. Right. I sort of wonder, but you were mentioning the pilots, who have been seeing these things for, going on 80 years now. Is this why so many pilots drink? It's sort of long been the scourge of the pilot, right? Everybody, the idea of the alcoholic pilot, and you sort of, it's making me wonder.
Well, it can't help, knowing that you've seen things that you just can't talk about or you risk your career. I think in general, it's because it's just such a high stress job.
Yeah.
They're dealing with like constant adrenaline, and then the rest of the time they have to do something to deal with all the buildup of that. So, but I mean, in general, this feeling of decoherence, the reason we're looking for signal in the noise, and that's our theme here, is because there's so damn much noise. And so how do you nail down what's really happening, what's really true? How do you form a coherent framework for how to approach reality?
So I have a question for you. And I don't think I've ever asked you this, but
Okay.
what was the story, because, the lore, the UFO and UAP lore is massive, right? What was the story for you personally that was sort of arrested you in your tracks?
So when I was a kid, I was interested in this stuff. And then I was probably in like 6th grade, and I would get books out of the library.
Yeah.
And then I ended up reading something that scared me too much. And I was like, I don't want to know about this anymore. This is creeping me out. I don't. And I dropped it. And then I kind of got busy with life, and I grew up and I did other things. And then in 2017, this story came out in the New York Times front page, if I remember correctly. And I feel like it was a Sunday. And we were all sitting in the van as a family. I think we had just gotten out of church, and my wife was in the store, and I'm just doing the thing where I'm reading news on my phone. It's raining. And I start reading this story, and it's primarily an interview with a guy named Lou Elizondo, who you now know who he is, but at the time, nobody knew who he was.
Yeah.
And he ran the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program out of the Pentagon, which was basically, he was tasked to look into all these UFO things that the government was tracking and logging. And he started realizing this stuff is real. It doesn't have oversight. There's something going on here that's really sketchy.
It's off books.
It's off books. Yeah. It's all these
pencils up.
Yeah. These unacknowledged special access programs is what they call them, USAPs. And so like a special access program, already you have to have a very high level of clearance to get into them. The unacknowledged ones is the, if you get caught, we don't talk about it kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so he found out about this stuff, and he was trying to get information out to the public because he believed the public has a right to know. This is not information we should be keeping from people, and Congress should know because they're funding stuff that, that they're not even aware that they're funding. And so he ended up resigning from his position so that he could become a whistleblower. And the story was very interesting. Concurrent with the story, he got 2 videos declassified that they had photos of, still frames in the Times piece, but they were also released simultaneous online. These are known as the Gimbal and the Go Fast videos. You can look them up. They're cockpit footage, infrared. I think both of them are infrared. From fighter jets that are tracking UFOs, and you can hear the pilots talking about them, and they're like, what are they? Holy crap, look how fast it's going, and they're not detailed enough that, they're dispositive. But there's definitely something really going on there. And so geeks have been analyzing the physics of what's going on, and, why it's not as hot, as it should be, considering that it's got to have a good propulsion system and all these kind of things. They're getting into the weeds and the details. But there are these very interesting flight characteristics, like the gimbal is this craft that's literally rotating because it's an oblong shape. You can see it rotate as it's flying at speed, and we don't have things that can do that. We have wings. If you just rotate, you're going to change directions. You can't.
Because the wind shear and all that sort of dictates.
So that caught my attention, and so I started paying attention to it. And then the next piece that really grabbed me, and this is funny, I don't think I've ever actually said this, was this documentary by a guy named Jeremy Corbell. He made a documentary called Area 51 and Flying Saucers, like the Bob Lazar story. And I'd never heard of Bob Lazar. Didn't know who he was, but I ended up watching the documentary because it looked compelling. And Bob Lazar was this guy who was a young physicist who alleges that he was brought into a program run out of basically Area 51 in the Los Alamos National Laboratories. He was working for Los Alamos National Laboratories. He got pulled into this program, and it was a reverse engineering program for crashed UFOs, basically. And he said it was extremely secretive. It was extremely compartmentalized. He's like, I was only allowed to like work on the little piece that I was given.
Yeah.
And the only thing I knew about my predecessor is that he had died on the job, but not why. You know, like that was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so he's brought in to do this. He's brought in to do this according to his story. And at some point, so what happens is in order to get into a program like this, you have to be cleared at a really high level. And that means they don't just look into you, they look into your family and they look into everybody around you. They look for anything that could destabilize you and make you weak so that you might give up a secret about something, right? Well, they were monitoring all of the phone communication from his home while he was at work, and they found out his wife was having an affair, partially because he was at the lab all the time.
All the time, yeah.
And they were so worried that it was going to destabilize him that they started to basically treat him differently. And when they started treating him differently, I think they were trying to kind of push him out of the program. And he thought, I know too much and something's going to happen to me too.
Yeah.
So what he did is he went to the local Las Vegas news station. And there's this young reporter there at the time, a guy by the name of George Knapp, who was open to covering weird stories about stuff.
Yeah.
And so he gave him this like backlit silhouette, like, you know, I work at this thing,
classic.
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, classic.
And then eventually he ends up coming out. This is in the 80s. So he comes out and winds up going fully on camera because he was afraid they were going to kill him. He thought, they're pushing me out. I know too much. You know, and one of the things that he had been doing, though, is that he was, when he started his exfiltration out of the program.
Yeah, we're talking about Bob Lazar here.
Bob Lazar.
Yeah.
He started taking people out to the desert on certain nights and told them, bring a video camera because they test these things. And so there are apparently VHS recordings that still exist of them test flying stuff that is defying known physics. And he was accurate about it every time. But the thing that's weird about Bob is his entire history has been erased. So he said he went to MIT. There's no record of him going to MIT. He said he worked at Los Alamos National Laboratories. They couldn't find any record of him until recently. They found an old phone book from the labs, and his name and extension were in the book.
That's interesting.
But
So
there's just these little pieces of corroborating evidence. But the guy has maintained the same story for over 30 years. He doesn't make money off of it. Like, he is clearly uncomfortable whenever he has to talk about it. And the thing that struck me was, and this is, I remember getting done and looking at my wife and going, he's not lying. Like, whatever is really going on there, that guy is telling the truth as far as he understands it.
Yeah.
And the truth that he was telling was crazy. You know, dealing with anti-gravity fields, and like they got inside of a spacecraft and it looked like it was made for small beings like children. Like, you know, there were no control surfaces, like all these different things. He's describing all this. And I found the fact that he just didn't come across as a BSer and he was talking about something so outlandish, utterly fascinating. And so then I just kept digging.
Okay. All right. Yeah. That's really interesting. I think part of the reason why I have remained open, initially I was I was a total normie. I thought all this was kind of crazy, like whatever, go watch the X-Files, champ, you do you kind of a thing. I find the kind of ethnographies that Diana Pasulka has done in both American Cosmic and Encounters to be really compelling reading. And not because it's definitive, but she does enough storytelling and talking to people who have all these weird experiences that it's really difficult to shut the door. And every part of my being wants to close the door on this stuff, right? Like, I don't like I have come to this whole thing, like you, I like space as a kid. I like space stories and Star Wars and, dreamed about all those kinds of things. But like, when it comes down to it, like, I am not your typical UFO guy, right? In any stretch of the imagination. She does such a good job of just laying a bunch of things out. These are the testimonies of these people. And she never really says if she believes it or not. And so I actually, some people get a little frustrated with her, and I have at times gotten a little frustrated with her, but, she lays a lot out and draws a lot of different things and like leaves a lot of space as in,
room for interpretation.
Room, right?
Yeah.
A lot of room. And so I really appreciate that. And as a result, I have started poking around a little bit more. And, and obviously we're friends and, you share stuff with me, but, not a ton, right? It's not like I say, give me the 10 next YouTube videos I need to watch on this kind of thing, right? But to me, the angle that opened it up for me is the fact that our United States government has been up to a lot of no good from the Manhattan Project to now.
Mm-hmm.
And we look at the Manhattan Project, I think most people are like, wow, like that's so amazing, like so incredible, right? And look, doing what they did in the time frame that they did it, incredible. World changing. But you start poking that a little bit more. You're like, wait, they did what? In the middle of a war, they did what? They were able to pull this in order to pull off the Manhattan Project. What was the name of the place in New Mexico?
It's White Sands is where they tested it.
Yeah.
It's basically, it was the origin for Los Alamos National Laboratories.
Right. Los Alamos. That's what I was looking for. Dumb. It's at the end of the day, Steve. Give me a break.
It's all good.
But I appreciate it. To pull off what they pulled off in Los Alamos required a level of duplicity and shenanigans and lying and money and secrecy and covert ops that I feel just gets kind of ignored. Like, yeah, well, we had to do a bunch of awful stuff, but hey, we got the bomb and we ended the war, right? It's like this sort of, okay, well, all's well that ends well. Like, well, I don't know if all's well, that exactly ends well. So anyway, so that kind of has opened up some space for me. And so
for what they can get away with in
exactly,
secret.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. Did you get that thing I sent you the other night about the Eastman Kodak company?
No, I don't remind
So what
me.
happened was they started noticing that their film stock was showing artifacts of X-ray radiation. And it, again, I haven't vetted this story. It was an anecdote that somebody told, and I want to look it up. But basically, they ended up mailing the federal government, and they said, we know what you're doing, and we're going to go to the public with it if you don't stop ruining all our film. And so, again, don't know for sure if this is a real story. It was told as a historical anecdote, and like we keep talking about, it's so hard to vet everything, especially when you're, swinging by it. But just this idea of like, there were signs of what they were doing. I mean, the Trinity test shattered windows 100 miles away, if I remember correctly, and they had to come up with an explanation for that. I mean, they're good at coming up with explanations.
Yeah, of course.
But there were signs for sure.
Yeah. And so you start to, so I just don't think enough people grok with that as, again, I always talk about mental models, but like you have to create however it is you see the world, right? You have to include a big chunk of this screen to include the fact that the government is capable of doing these kinds of things. And not only are they capable of doing it, but they have done these things, right? You think of something like MK Ultra, perfect example. Project Blue Book, you've already mentioned it, right? Whatever the heck the CIA has been up to since it was instantiated in the wake of the Second World War. I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff that, again, I don't pretend to know. I don't have any special knowledge here. I always joke, I teach poetry at an obscure boarding school in the smallest state in the Union. It's like, who am I? But, you have to include space for that.
I mean, they experimented on Americans without their knowledge. They did it with radiation. They did it with syphilis. They did it, like, there are real conspiracies about stuff they really did that was really dirty.
Good. You brought up the word, right? And so, again, if I could sort of pose this to the audience and of course to you, Steve, it's like when you hear the word conspiracy, are you capable of hearing it without the next word that automatically gets filled in? It's like when you're on a Google search and you start typing a word and it fills in.
Well, the problem with that word is that every conspiracy is a theory until it's proven.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Right. Exactly. And so much gets cover, plausible deniability, because we are incapable of listening to the word conspiracy without automatically filling in the word theory. And as soon as you hear conspiracy theory, your brain just does this thing where it's just like, oh, crazy people.
Yeah. I don't want to be
Crazy people.
associated with that.
I don't want, icky, yuck, right? Outside of the pale, all these kinds of things.
But at the same time, the 0.5, force 5, is why we have such an exponential increase in conspiracy theories now. And you see people saying stuff all the time that you're like, where in the world did you come up with that? Like, how can you honestly believe that that's true? I have an instinctive aversion to conspiracy theories only because I have a big imagination. I can imagine anything. Like, give me a scenario and I'll come up with a story about it. But that doesn't mean it's right. I can make it sound believable. That doesn't make it right. So show me the evidence. Like, add some stuff up to make your case instead of just speculating.
Today in class, I happen to be talking about mimetic desire. Rene Girard, his theory on mimetic desire in class today. And we read a little section in this book called Wanting by Luke Burgess. And the subtitle of this chapter is called Torches of Freedom. And the story goes that Eddie Bernays, the godfather of public relations, orchestrated a totally fabricated show on the streets of New York City in Easter 1919, I think it was maybe 21. Anyway, that's sort of the rough time frame. He, in one felled swoop, orchestrated an event in which, as all of the fancy people are processing up and down Fifth Avenue after church service on Easter Sunday, which used to be a really big deal in New York back in 1920, thereabouts, he hires 12 models, but not models that are too pretty, like just like, pretty, but not like stratospheric, right? And between a certain time, all of them would conspicuously take out a pack of cigarettes.
I remember this now.
And light a cigarette and walk up and down the street and then ask for a light and like do all these kinds of things. And
because at the time it was
totally
women
gross.
Did not smoke in public.
Right. It was everybody knew, and that's what I was saying in class today. Everybody knows that a woman should not smoke in public, right?
Not ladylike.
In one fell swoop, he's got the photographers there, and the next day, pictures of women parading up and down Fifth Avenue with a cigarette and they had a Lucky Strike or whatever. I think it was actually Lucky Strikes, are in all the New York papers, all the major cities, Santa Fe, like all over the world. And so overnight, Eddie Bernays is able to astroturf a campaign which expands the market for his clients' cigarettes by double. Just like that, right? So again, I think in models, if that can happen with a friggin' cigarette, what else can we fabricate? And so to get, to one of your points here is like, we talk about the sort of reality crisis, and all that, like, and I know I want to bring it back, what else can we create? But to get it to the sort of the whole UAP thing, what else can be just seeded and overnight it becomes, well, obviously everybody knows X.
Right.
And it's like this weird moment where you're like, whoa, what else are we capable of doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in this particular instance, what was seeded was Stigma.
Yeah.
It was very intentional. Like Project Blue Book was designed to create debunkable UFO events so that they could keep showing we looked into it and it wasn't real. We looked into it and it wasn't real.
And that's why I find those ethnographies so compelling. that Pasulka charts, these stories, you're like, okay, like that's just not nothing.
But when you see these guys, I mean, one of the most compelling things that I remember ever seeing about this, at the National Press Club in DC in like 2012, they have had multiple hearings on this. But they had this one. They had Bob Salas. They had David Schindel. And Schindel was the one who really struck me. These are guys who are in their 80s now. But they worked as officers at Minuteman nuclear missile bases in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
There was an incident. It may have been more than one incident. I always mix up the two testimonies. I'm not sure if they're from the same exact time or if they're separate events. Malmstrom Air Force Base, which I believe is in Montana, was where this happened. And the MPs are up top, in their Jeep, military police, and they get on the hard line and they call down to the bunker, and because the commanding officer is in the bunker, right? And this is a time when there's no wireless anything.
Yeah.
There's no Bluetooth, there's no cell phones, there's nothing, right? And it's a hardened bunker against electronic interference, so they have to use a hard line because the wire goes through the concrete and everything else, right? And they call down and they're like, hey, there's something hovering. There's a flying saucer hovering over this base. Like, what do we do? Do we engage with it? Like, it's not supposed to be here. And as the call is being listened to by the guys down in the base, their control panel is showing the missiles shutting off one by one by one. And I think over an extended period of time, more than a dozen missiles were shut off by some force that they were never able to identify. They investigated the missiles, and the control, there was some control chip burned out in every single one of them. And they were like, this is impossible. Like, there was no way this could be done. There was no outside interference, nothing, right? But these guys who saw this stuff, they got threatened.
Yeah.
And if they talked about it later, and Schindel was in tears. Here's this man who, had a distinguished career, was trusted with nuclear missiles and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, I didn't tell my wife about it for 40 years. Not even my wife, because I was so scared of what would happen to me, because they made it no uncertain terms. They told me, this never happened. You don't talk to anybody about this. And you hear this over and over. The nurse I was telling you about at our assisted living home, when he was in Army in Afghanistan, he was sent to secure a mountain, and they weren't told why. And something had landed on the mountain was all that they were told. And so they secured the road going up. And then these guys show up in black fatigues, unmarked, no branch of the military, basically are like, get out of here. You never saw anything. This didn't happen. We're taking over from here. Like, this kind of stuff just happens. And these guys have these stories, and they're like, what do we do with this? Like, I don't know.
What's the famous story of the actual landing where these creatures pop out and talk to the military brass?
So that's at Holloman Air Force
Holloman,
Base.
that's what.
And that is also in Alamogordo.
I find that one extremely compelling.
So
personally.
this everything ties back to Alamogordo. Everything ties back to White Sands and Los Alamos. Holloman Air Force Base is on the southwestern side of Alamogordo, New Mexico, very close to the White Sands missile testing range.
Yeah.
And that's where they did the Trinity test. That's where the first bombs were. Before Roswell, there was, like, days after the Trinity test, there was a UFO crash right in that same area.
Wow. There
is some connection between nuclear stuff and these things showing up, and they've never been able to demonstrate definitively why. But yeah, so Holloman Air Force Base, there was allegedly a meeting between some kind of non-human intelligence and the military brass at the base. And, it was Dr. Eric Davis. I sent you that video. He was telling the story. He got the story from George H.W. Bush.
Yeah.
Because he was talking to him about, what he knew as president, and he was CIA director. He had a hard time getting read into the program.
Which is
he was
amazing,
actually accidentally read in because
amazing.
Somebody thought he had been briefed. And he's like, what are you talking about? And the guy was like, well, I thought you were read in by your senior staff. And he was like, no, they didn't tell me anything. But this goes back to, the big story over the weekend was Barack Obama saying, aliens are real, right? And then he walks it back. But he's talked about this multiple times over the years, that there's something there and it's hard to find out about. Clinton said he tried to find out and they wouldn't tell him.
Yeah.
And presidents have been known to be treated as temporary 4-year employees who don't have a need to know about the deep
which
stuff
is a
that's
wild,
going on.
Just thinking about the implications of that. It's like, wait, what? The president of the United States is
But
a
I
temporary...
think they assume that it's a risk
Yeah.
because he has executive power and he can be like, I'm going to just tell everybody. Like Donald Trump is going to be like, I can tell everybody about this. Then I go down in history as the guy who told this story. You know, and so they have this fear of if he doesn't need to know about it because of something that's going on that means he has to know, it's better for him not to know. Then it removes the risk of exposure.
Yeah, I've heard a bunch of folks, you know, whisper and mention Dick Cheney's name connected to all of this, that he was sort of involved with, what is it called, the Legacy program or something like that?
Dave Grush is the one who pointed the finger at him as being the guy who was basically, if there was anybody in charge of it, it was him.
Wow. He's dead, Steve.
He's dead. But I mean, if you could pick a guy who would run a dark program,
I mean,
where they kill people to keep secrets,
I mean, you know,
I just feel like you couldn't put, you know, a more on the nose casting together.
Right. Essential casting calls. We need a Dick Cheney. Oh, look, we have one right here. His name is Dick Cheney. Perfect.
It's perfect.
Okay. Yeah. Amazing. I mean, just absolutely amazing.
Yeah. It's incredible.
So what do you say to the kind of, you know, guys who know us on X, and, you know, we post this kind of stuff all the time, but I mean, what would you say to a kind of normal person that's like, yeah, you guys are nuts?
I just tell people, you know, you got to just keep like following the evidence, you know, follow the evidence. I didn't come into this believing it because I have some delight that I take in being fooled. For me, it was about patterns. You know, a couple of really interesting things happened. They confirmed things that I had suspected a long time ago. And then I was like, well, then let me keep looking. And so now 2017 was 9 years ago. Like I've been looking ever since, and I've read so much, and I've interacted with so many people, and they're credible people, you know, or I've watched the testimonies. I've watched every one of these congressional hearings. There's a guy that I'm friends with on X who's like a software engineer. He created a database of all the media mentions of flying saucers and UFOs from going back to the 1940s. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of stories in this database now.
But what I don't think people understand about you is you are extremely skeptical.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't say that as a shade. I'm just trying to be honest. Like, you know, you are ready to not take it. Like, you know, in other words, you like, because look, we all know people who are like, you know, especially, you know, you and I both come out of Catholic circles, and I am Catholic, and you did the whole 1 Peter 5 thing. And so you had people regularly sending you like pretty wild emails all the time, right? Of weird things that happened to them. And, you know, so you and I both know people who are like looking for reasons to believe. You know, it's like they, you know, they're Catholic versions of like the X-Files type, and then they're like sci-fi versions of the X-Files type. Like they just like give them a crumb, and they can make a cake out of almost anything. Like you're
like
not like that.
Apparitionism is the Catholic version of ufology.
Amen. Amen. And that is going to, I think, open up. I think that there's a lot of space there, you know, and both you and I are, I think, pretty darn familiar with that terrain.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I don't want to go into it too much in this episode, but, you know, Chris Bledsoe's, you know, the guy who wrote the book UFO of God. It's a weird, interesting book. If you haven't read it.
And like, he is a weird, interesting dude.
He's a weird, interesting dude. I've seen him do stuff on television. He calls out to these orbs and they show up in the sky. Like, I don't know how he does any of this stuff, right? But he's had these apparitions of some kind from a woman he only refers to as the lady. He's Baptist. He's not Catholic, but she matches the description of the Virgin Mary.
Right.
You
For
know,
those of us who know, yeah.
And she told him that she gave him some enigmatic clue that some big thing was going to happen. And when he decoded it was some sign of like when the star, you know, Regulus, you know, sits in this blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So he worked with astronomers to figure it out. And it's April of this year. So Easter of this year, he's going around telling everybody who will listen, you know, some new information, some new awakening is going to happen based on this. Now, those are testable theories. I like those.
Sure,
I like things that have dates on them.
Yeah.
Because they can be like, okay, well, this is BS, so let's move on. But to me, it's the same as anything else. If there's smoke, there's probably fire. So look into it. It's pattern recognition. It's saying there's more going on here than meets the eye. Eric Weinstein has said, There is no verifiable scientific evidence, no hard evidence that he's come across about any of this stuff, but there is a mountain of circumstantial evidence that is so compelling, so similar across so many different stories that he would be foolish to not at least try to figure out what's going on.
I don't want to throw any kind of partisan bomb into this discussion, but since we're here, I'm going to say it. How much of the skepticism of the ufology thing and the kind of weird, spooky things, how much of that do you think is downstream from the fact that despite, you and I both growing up Catholic, the world we live in is really founded on a kind of Protestant, desacramentalized worldview, where in Newton's universe, there's no such thing of things outside of the laws or the rules of physics.
Right. It's been distilled down into pure empiricism.
Yeah, pure
materialism. It doesn't have to be nihilistic materialism, but there's a sense. There's a sense in which, again, Pixar, it didn't happen. If I can't prove it, it must not be real. And that doesn't, for whatever reason, that doesn't apply in these people's minds to spiritual phenomena. But then again, I think maybe that's why they reclassify this as a form of demonic manifestation, because it's the only map they have for that territory.
Yes, I was just saying, thank you. Right, because every time I get in these conversations, even just casually, like there's always a guy or two who wants to sort of go hard into the paint on it's demons, damn it, right? And look, to be clear, I am wide open to the possibility that this could be in part explained by some kind of demon thing. Okay, so I do hold a space for that personally, but I also, just in reading all of these accounts, recognize that sometimes these people, many people have horrifying, nightmarish, life-altering, life-ending experiences, however you want to categorize it, however otherwise you want to categorize them. But there are some people who have these, what you and I in a kind of Catholic frame would be they just had an experience of some kind of vastly benevolent angels or spirits or something like that, right? But my frustration of those guys that go hard in the paint for sort of it's all demons is that in some sense it's giving over the conversation to a kind of supersessionist, more modern, eminent frame Protestantism. And again, those of you who know me, I am not a partisan bomb thrower when it comes to Catholic and Protestant and Orthodox questions. I'm actually pretty ecumenical, ironically enough. But there is that thing in common, which shrinks the world into just what you can see, taste, touch, and feel. And then a couple of thousand years ago, Jesus did a bunch of really weird things, kind of cool, but that's all stopped now.
Yeah, we don't do that anymore.
We don't do that. Right. That's not how we play anymore. Right. And so how much of this disconnect, this angst, is downstream from that?
No, I think that's a good instinct to pursue. It's probably a rationalist post-enlightenment, way of looking at things, but it's also, it's more complicated than that. I was attracted to this because of sort of the hard, crunchy, empirical exterior of this issue, right? I was there are crashes, there's debris, there's photographs, there's radar signatures, there's gun camera footage, there's these are real things that can be looked at and tested. But I avoided, and I've talked to you about this a lot, I avoided anything that felt like it crossed over too much into woo and weird. And that could be an alien or that could be a demon, because I'm I don't know how to sort that out. And as somebody who was Catholic and who worked for a guy who was basically an exorcist and who experienced some very strange preternatural things, not happening to me, but to other people that I observed. Nothing about this maps to that except for that gooey, weird preternatural center. I didn't pay attention to what goes on at Skinwalker Ranch for years because it's both.
Right, because of it, right? And that's kind of what I was drawing you
like
out. Like
shadow figures and creepy feelings and like all the kind of stuff, like hitchhikers that like people go to the ranch and they come home and weird stuff follows them and like, their cameras shut off and their doors closed. And it's very poltergeisty type stuff, right?
Right.
But at the same time, you watch that show and they got the thermal cameras out and they've got, they're monitoring the spectrum analyzer and all this stuff, and they're getting distinct frequencies. They're seeing UFOs coming up out of like literally out of the solid rock, and they're filming it. And these are things that have form and substance, and you're going, there's this convergence of two forces here, and I don't know how to make sense out of that. But to me, the wrong way to approach it is through question begging. I only have this framework. So to beg the question is to assume you know the answer, before you even ask. It's a logical fallacy. It must be this. My soteriology says that Christ became man and he died for all men, and that's it. There's no more. So. And if they're not men, if they don't fall under that act of salvation, then they don't fit in my understanding of the way religion works, and therefore it must be a deception. Therefore it must be demons. Like that's one of the things that happens. And it's I mean, we don't have a framework for anything other than God, angels, people. Like that's it. That's all we know. And yet, we have the James Webb telescope out there showing us that there are hundreds of billions of galaxies in this universe. And the idea that like we could never conceivably get halfway across. We can't, you realize in the Star Trek shows, like they never even leave the Milky Way. They're using warp drive and all this. Yeah. They don't leave our galaxy because it's too damn big.
Yeah.
And so the idea that all this stuff is out there, but it's just us, to me, that is crazy odds. It's crazy odds. But to them, it's humanity is a singular act of divine creation. The earth was cosmologically believed to be in the center of the universe. It's the reason why Galileo got in so much trouble, because if Christ was born and made man on earth, then it must be the center point of all things, right?
Yeah, you should check out the conversation I had with Larry Chapp about this. I thought he had some pretty cool.
Yeah, I've been meaning to watch
things.
That one.
No, it's fine, but he had some pretty cool creative things. I thought sort of he's great because he's willing to kind of think out loud.
Well, obviously Lewis was. I mean, you talk about Lewis's space trilogy all the time.
Yeah. But again, wishing the world were simpler and smaller doesn't make it so. And I think it's important for us to look, epistemic humility, right? I have just learned, not to shut off everything. Obviously, you have to have a kind of practical jig to shrink the world, to make your way throughout your day and your weeks and your hours. Yeah, of course. But you have to hold this thing open enough to where, you can be surprised.
Having a closed epistemology makes you brittle. And this is the thing.
Which is what we're both worried about that.
Right. I mean, that's not just us. I mean, this is the thing the whistleblowers are saying that factions within the government are worried about. And this why this stuff hasn't ever been made public. Because they have a fear that if people find out that everything that they believed theologically, philosophically, ontologically about humanity
implicitly
is not actually true.
Yeah.
It could break down all of society.
Yeah.
Like what happened? Like, I mean, the people who think there's no way these could be anything but demons, imagine their reaction if President Trump gives a press conference and is like, there actually is something here.
Yeah.
We have evidence of this. They're not us. We don't, whatever level of knowledge he has.
Yeah.
Those people are going to go into panic.
Yeah.
Because they cannot accept the idea that maybe I have to update my priors based on evidence.
Yeah.
Evidence has to be configured to fit their priors. That's how they do it.
Nobody wants to do that. And I'm sympathetic. I'm not, none of us want to do that, actually. I mean, really.
But I mean, we get forced to do it all the time.
No. Yeah. But please understand me. We have to. One always must, right? Otherwise, you live in cognitive dissonance. We've talked about this, right? But again, wanting it not to be so is not the same thing as it not being so. And I don't know how to, I don't really know how to have that conversation. So I'm talking to you.
And this is the kind of thing, though, because of the scope, because of the scale of what it would mean, because of the systems it could potentially topple. Because, going back to the beginning, of talking about the reality crisis and how being unmoored from religion changes the very ethics and structure of public life. If a vast number of people come to the conclusion that this disproves their understanding of religion, what follows from that? What behaviors will we see? And so understanding that being forced to confront something that makes you uncomfortable, oh, a politician I liked was actually a liar and a dirtbag.
Mm-hmm.
That's one level. Being forced to confront pure ontological shock. This is how I thought the universe operated, and it's actually completely different than that. That breaks people.
Well, Steve, again, and I'm not directing this at you at all, because your situation is much more complicated, but what if you get a pope who's not a good guy?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean,
look at how much
what happened.
No, but that shattered a lot of us.
Yeah.
Right? Because my prior frame precluded that possibility from ever happening.
Yep.
And here we are.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
right?
This is one of my main critiques of Catholicism is it creates such a rigid framework. It creates such, a rigid understanding of how things work and the interlacing of authority and teaching and irreformability and all this kind of stuff that if you break a dogma, if you're like, this dogma is clearly BS, well, then how do you trust any of the other ones?
Yeah.
If you came into the system going, you know what? God started this thing and we're going to do our best, but we're going to screw up because we're not God. And, he's not exactly on the red phone. We're not talking to him every day. So there's going to be some things we get right and some things we get wrong and we'll update as we go. Then it's not fragile. It doesn't break. Because, oh, well, you told us you were going to make mistakes and you did. And okay.
Yeah.
But when you I can't ever make a mistake. I can never reverse a teaching. I can never, and then it happens. You're like, well, now I'm having to try to force feed that information into a framework that it doesn't hold.
Right. And even, exactly. And, moving around it, like walking around this hyper object, as I like to call it, looking around at this thing, it's like, I can see all of this and I can hear exactly what you're saying. And at the same time, I understand why you need such a kind of binding real thing. It's like, it's weird because I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth here, but you have to reckon with the inconsistencies. But at the same time, I also understand what happens when the thing loses its coherence and it loses its weight. It loses its standing. It loses its power to bind and loose. And it's like, where does that leave us? Right. I mean, that's the hard thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a question of structure versus freedom. And it's one of the things that I find most humorous is that people will justify any kind of horrific thing like eternal conscious torment as a precondition of the existence of free will. And I'm like, I don't think that's how it works. I don't think that free will, is so dangerous that it has to be threatened with horrifically unjust consequences in order for free will to work. Like, do you have free will in heaven? Supposedly you do. Well, then there must be some version of things where you can have free will and the world can be not, something that's pointed at you with the barrel of a gun, where believe this or this terrible thing happens. Well, I don't understand how that's free will. How am I loving if I'm being threatened? How am I choosing anything if I'm being threatened? And so, but that is the difficulty is that if you give people freedom, they will come to varying conclusions. And so it's very difficult to build a religion on a framework that makes real provision for free will.
Well, yeah. And everyone's tried.
Yeah.
Everyone has tried.
Whereas, with something like UFOs or whatever else, it's like, well, nobody's telling me bad things are going to happen to me if I do or don't believe this. It allows me to just pursue the information as it arrives and try to say, tack it onto a framework that is kind of open and flexible so that I can be like, okay, I used to think this, but this is really changing my opinion on that. And I'm allowed to do that. And it's something that Lawrence Krauss said in an interview with Jordan Peterson a few years back. And I always really appreciated this. I mean, he's a notorious atheist, but he said, what I love about science that I don't like about religion is that science not only can change its mind when new information comes in, but like if you as a scientist aren't forced to confront something that you fundamentally believed and found out was wrong, you're not doing science. You have to be willing to completely reconfigure your fundamentals periodically when some new discovery gets made and it challenges the things that you always thought you knew. And he's like, religion just doesn't have the humility to allow that to happen. It has to be the same all the time.
Yeah, and my only pushback to that would be on the spot here is that I would argue that science with a capital S behaves curiously like your characterization of the church.
Scientism.
Yeah, no. I know.
Yeah. I know that there's a lot of conflating of the terms.
But there's an institution.
Trust the science is the least scientific phrase
no,
in
of course.
history.
But institutional science, right? Try to have a heretical take in institutional science, and you will be chased out as quickly as any heretic from the 15th century. But
that all comes back to idealization of science, of funding of science.
Yeah.
I mean, Nikola Tesla was just running around doing crazy shit, because he wasn't dealing with that stuff. In the old days, scientists just did things.
Yeah, it was like the gentleman scientist, right, who would self-fund and kind of do wacky stuff in the back,
And there's a lot of, talking out of both sides of the mouth in the science community too.
Yeah,
Something that podcaster Jesse Michaels has brought up because he's done a deep dive into Thomas Townsend Brown, who was an American scientist who was doing a lot of research into anti-gravity, is that in the 50s, I think it was the 50s, there was a science conference here at UNC Chapel Hill here in Raleigh, and they had all the heavyweights. I think Oppenheimer was there. There's a lot of big guys, that came to the conference, and they basically said, yeah, anti-gravity is not something we're going to continue to research, because it was a big field of inquiry in physics in mid-century. But Thomas Townsend Brown was literally at that same university doing anti-gravity experiments and succeeding at some of them at the same time. There's photos of him popping champagne, and they just did some experiment, and there's anecdotal stories about him being able to, find ways to reverse gravitational fields on objects and all this stuff. But this cover kind of came out where it was like, hey, you know what? This dog won't hunt. Let's do string theory for 40 years, and that's going to go nowhere. Meanwhile, you've got Mark Andreessen, going to the White House last year or the year before, and they told him, oh yeah, during the Cold War, we classified entire areas of physics. Like, that's wild. And we'll do it again if we need to, because there's stuff the public just doesn't need to know. That science is too dangerous. And then Eric Weinstein has brought up the fact that the 1917 Espionage Act and the 1946 Energy Secrets Act have been combined. He's like, as a physicist, you can actually commit a capital crime simply by writing down equations. You don't even have to know. But if those equations are dangerous, if they could lead to destructive weapon technologies or nuclear secrets, you could just be figuring out a formula, and if you've written that down, that's technically a federal crime.
Amazing.
And he's like, we don't have protected speech as physicists because what we know has been proven to be that dangerous. So it's a crazy thing. Yeah. But I mean, you listen to the guy describe the structure of the way, a hydrogen bomb works. It was all physics and math, man. I mean, they figured out physics and math, the nerdiest subjects in school. Yeah. And they turned them into the most destructive force that the world has ever seen.
Yeah. And, I think both of us believe on some interesting way. I'm not exactly sure how I believe it, but that, we're doing a different kind of Los Alamos experiment, or rather,
program?
Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
And instead of the Manhattan Project, we're doing some wacky thing in Silicon Valley now.
But also, I mean, we've got, what's the discombobulator?
Yeah, that's right.
We
didn't even get to that.
If we go into Iran, it looks like we're about to do. Yeah. What sketchy, scary weapon? I mean, Trump keeps talking about how we have weapons that you've never seen and you cannot imagine the destructive capacity of. Where did those come from? Were those reverse engineered? Were they something else? Like, for years and years, the government denied that Havana syndrome was real when it was being used against their own operatives. And now they're like, oh yeah, we used that in Venezuela.
Yeah.
What?
And right, and I do that. Like, wait, is anybody paying attention? Like, what?
But this is what we're talking about: is they don't have a problem lying to us. They don't have a problem hiding things if they feel that it's for the greater good. And they are the sole discretionary parties making that decision.
Right. They get to determine that. And that's chilling, my friend. That is chilling. It chills me.
Yeah. And somehow we've already gone through 2 hours and 15 minutes of conversation that fast.
Dude. Maybe if we had them more often, we would have them shorter. I don't know.
No, but these are better. So we decided, if you're still with us, we're going to do them every other week.
Yeah.
Because it's just too much to do them every week with all the other work that we have to do in between. But I think this was a much better discussion because we had more pent up that we needed to talk about.
I think that's right. And plus you provided us with a great framework to kind of hang the conversation on and explore some things.
I'll link that in the description, and we'll keep building out that series.
Yeah, because I really do. I mean, I really do think it provides. I don't think you set out to do this. You're sort of working on these things, right? But I think this does provide us with a lot of buckets, to play around with, because it hits on, a lot of the things, and that you and I are, I wouldn't say obsessed with exactly, but concerned, pay attention to, monitor. So
yeah, I don't think it's obsession. I think we're seeing developments happening in real time, and there's a feeling of there being shifting sands. And what I wanted to do was plant some anchors so that the sands can move, but we've got some kind of a frame that stays more or less stable to try to analyze what's going on around. And it wasn't what I set out to do. I was originally just going to try to describe the weird feeling I had, but over time it builds into structure, I guess.
Well, we're going to have to mature this, over the course of our conversations, because like I said, it gives us a basic framework, and we can make the kind of connections. It's funny because as you were going through them, I'm like, oh wait, but I could see how 1 talks to 3 and 4 and 5 are clearly hovering under number 2.
They all connect to each other in various ways. And I think that's part of what makes them the central themes.
Yeah, he's exactly right. So, all right, well, man, I appreciate it as always. Fans,
you too.
I hope you have enjoyed our monitoring for this session. We'll see you next time. Yeah, Steve?
Yep. Take care.
All right. Cheers. Bye.